Okay, and we're going back up because I filled out all my job applications yesterday and did the callback interviews, and I think they went well. Oh, I got a June on here. That didn't, sorry, I had the jammer on over there. It didn't seem to make any difference. With the cell phone, you could hear a light gurgling, but apparently it's the text evolved around it on the cell phone. But I'm just going through all the stuff that was unpacked from the boxes and getting organized. I filled out all the applications, responded back yesterday with a lot of them did with an interview. So I did all the online interviews yesterday, and I think they went well. But of course, I got up in the morning, turned it off for a bit, was starting putting organizing clothes to hang up and all that other stuff, and just organize some things. And then I'm going to take a shower. He was a little bit subdued. Well, goes crazy, turned on all alcohol. I could have wasn't able to shave my legs. It was like not anything, but I mean, it was just absolutely hideous. So they didn't work. All this stuff about MESTRBAT and about like some troll war stuff and all this crazy stuff. And there's cute guys and I'm just there trying to watch, take a shower and shave my legs. So and I knew it could see me because I moved the chair to sit in the shower, down to shave my legs on, and it the chair in the shower, the chair in the shower, the chair in the shower. So I had to get then just all alcohol. But anyway, my hair got washed, which is staying greasy until the first of the month because I have to put product in it. But I don't have money for anything other than the coconut oil. Okay, so that's where we are now. Since I'm not doing anything, I don't think on the computer. Since I think the part-time Target was hiring piles of part-time positions, would be a great. A lot of them are seasonal and things like that, but longer term, if you want, would just be fun for what I'm doing right now, and I can, that can help pay for paralegal certification in order, while I look for other jobs. Also, since it would be if I worked out for 6 months and got broken from it, or just it wouldn't really be rude or shady or something to do that. So if I find a better job. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm going back upstairs. We'll see what pops out of the woodwork. I'm leaving it on because it needs to calm down. Right now, I would eat some lunch. I'm just upstairs. I finally decided to clean up because it was just make or to take a shower because makeup and stuff. But no, they're very much still at large. I probably have one more day of sorting. I would like to fundraise for Faraday cloth items. I'm going to have to pay for them. Like I said, there was a very nice, it looked like, set of pants and top, and then a Faraday tent. But for an affordable price for the Faraday cloth items, to obstruct me from view while I sleep and walk around the house. But each are $250 each. So I would like to be able to fundraise for things of that sort. It was a bit subdued yesterday, and I was able to get some cooking done, which I'm eating right now. I'm eating the rest of my salmon. Did a large lunch. My salmon bowl. Eat a whole much more produce and some. Because when he's doing that, you can I need to get my Toenails almost done to a point where I can paint them now. But you can't get anything done. Okay, my nails are done again because I will do the job interviews. I mean, it's just unbelievable how hard it is. Um, no, not training, always on like right on the inside of my. I'm not sure what that is. Kind of feels like your pee. He likes to say some kind of thing you pee. Urethra? How big? Except I'm not a man. Hideous. Yeah. It kind of sounds like you. It burns. It burns and it's in the peel. Pee too. Yeah. Which is really offending. Okay. And it's electrocuting me and all the rest of it. We should talk back. For some reason, I'm talking back to the guy doing that. I have a whole big thing of bacon liver and onions. It's gonna make some cheesecake that I'm out of the week. Good cooking done for the week. Yeah. I'm gonna jog up to the store and get some eggs. Nothing else. Not necessarily still some more partner. I'm going to eat half of it. And that's the dessert with my second one. But they are still definitely at large. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So, and I mean, it turns out for a second, and you don't just have to crawl up in a wall, hiding from, like, trying to protect your body from the thing being electrocuted. I'm afraid I'm going to go like boiled intestines. Okay, would you please get these men into custody already? No, actually, and I mean, there's no argument. They're just using it for as criminally as possible. I'm concerned also the thing with I mean, if he's aiming it, is it an adult dose? How did you tell I guess the computer is just a laptop. But something that is like, that would be twice as strong for a child. And would you check to see if there's hysterical parents in Arkansas calling the police or wherever else these freak monsters are? Well, they just call me a freak monster. If it starts up again, I don't have to eat. There's another hand that's on the leg out. I can make a cheesecake in my sleep. No, you disgusting. No, you do not start electrocuting me. You could trip me to Nitto. And Nitto is obviously the weirdest criminal nobody's ever met on this thing. Just really not good. Very bad. This is why. It's probably engaged in home invasion robbery, since the use of the stuff they got going on over there is widespread and has been for criminal purposes for years at different times. So there are probably home invaded, murdered, identity thefted people out there. When there's this much goat, there's probably a fire if it's not isolated smoke. And it's been going on for a long time, then there's probably going to be that. This is incredibly foul criminal behavior for anybody to be condoning. I can't believe it's still at large. It's absolutely bizarre. No, you disgusting son of a bitch. Please get these men into custody. Please get these men into custody. No, you were lucky. And you still would go back to doing what you're not supposed to do. Get him in custody now, already on that man. So this is already molesting a child. Doing something to you.
Morning, everyone. As on this Friday, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. We're going to start in Venezuela, where rescuers are in a
Just
race
like taking a
against
shower
five
for
survivors trapped
Ooh,
under
they didn't give me a shower.
following Wednesday's
They couldn't see you. I just moved the chair on the bed. 2 days ago.
with the most powerful to rock Venezuela in more than a century. Rock the capital, rock the
And also, if you sat down and checked these
north
messages.
of that city. Venezuela's health minister
She
says
went
at
away.
least 235 people were killed and thousands injured. Thousands more are also appear to be missing in the disaster. Countries around the world are rushing to aid Venezuela, which was already weakened by economic and political turmoil. The U.S. is among those sending help. Southern Command says that its team arrived in Venezuela to help with those relief efforts. We've got a team standing by to talk about all this and so much more. We're going to kick things off with NBC News correspondent George Solis. George, good morning.
Guys, good morning. It is now a race against time. Unfortunately, that death toll, as you mentioned, continues to climb. More than 200 dead, more than 4,300 injured. 7.2, 7.5 magnitude quakes, the strongest in more than a century to hit Venezuela. We're here at the Global Empowerment Mission, where from day one now, people have been donating as much as they can. People are just compelled to help. You might be able to see some of the boxes here behind me. The question is, how is some of this aid going to get into the country with the airport damaged and closed for the time being? Now, we do know organizations from around South Florida are working with partners in the country right now to help mobilize it. But that's not the only entity doing it. The U.S. military is also saying they are going to provide humanitarian aid. U.S. Southern Command, or SOUTHCOM, says they're planning on supplying aircraft, logistics, and critical life-saving logistics to help the people of Venezuela. There's more than 150 million already pledged to help with recovery and rebuild efforts in the country. Interim President Delcy Rodriguez has been to some of the worst of the devastation. She says, obviously, it is rampant and they're still trying to assess the full scope of damage. We have also spoken with survivors of the earthquake. One woman telling us that she was at the epicenter of these quakes, saying it just felt like one long, continuous tremor. She recalls trying to get in a car, seeing buildings that were crumbling around her, seeing buildings that were on fire, roads that were eroded, people in the streets crying out for help. She made it safely to Caracas with her family. She was very emotional as she spoke to us because for that time being, she was not able to communicate with her family, telling us she just feels so lucky to be alive. And again, at this hour, there are rescuers coming in from around the country to help Venezuela, to help the people dig out the rubble. Some of the images that we have been seeing of people being rescued, giving some people hope that that is going to be the case for maybe those that have not been able to reach their loved one. And again, back here in South Florida, home to a very large Venezuelan community. People will continue to help. The idea here is to make sure this warehouse is packed. So when these resources can get into the country, they need to help those people.
Get them into custody now and out of my house and off my internet account.
Look at how the U.S. is responding to this this disaster with NBC
And Southcom.
reporter Catherine Doyle. So Catherine, Southcom, that's the U.S. Southern Command, is aiding the State Department in these relief operations. What kind of support is the U.S. offering to Venezuela right now?
That's right. Good morning, Joe. So the president said that we would deploy a multi-agency response to this. And Southcom is there to set up a command in Caracas. As George mentioned, the U.S. has pledged $150 million to this as well. And the State Department is also there working hard to make sure that the U.S. is involved and operating search and rescue operations and aiding in finding any efforts that they can.
This is, as we mentioned, a time of turmoil for Venezuela and U.S. relations. Reminder, back in January, U.S. forces captured and brought the country's then president, Nicolas Maduro, to America. With all that in mind, what's been the reaction from President Trump to this disaster, knowing America has had such a heavy hand this year when it comes to the leadership in that country?
That's right. It's a very sensitive time diplomatically between the U.S. and Venezuela, and the president touched on this. Take a listen to what he said last night in his remarks.
We took over Venezuela in less than 1 day, and the oil is flowing, and we're getting along with them great. We're going to, by the way, help them with their big and tremendous earthquake last night. Wrecked that mess in Caracas. But we're going to help them out.
For months, the U.S. has been working with Venezuela's new leader, Delcy Rodriguez. So now is really a moment when the U.S. government, the Trump administration, is going to be able to demonstrate what kind of partner it can be in these efforts and going forward.
And Catherine, for any Americans who are caught up in this catastrophe, what is the advice from the State Department? Is the U.S. Embassy still functioning there?
The embassy is operating and they're monitoring the situation. They've asked that any U.S. citizens and Americans monitor the State Department's enrollment program for Americans overseas. That will provide critical information with what's going on and allow people to keep in touch with U.S. authorities if they figure out what's next.
Right, Catherine Doyle in Washington. Catherine, thank you so much. As the international response grows in Venezuela, humanitarian groups are racing for life-saving aid to survive. She's vice president. And Eleanor, good to have you with us. Your organization has been working in Venezuela for years now, and we're scaling up your relief efforts. Doing that right now. What are the most urgent needs?
Thanks for having me. Yes, we've been working in Venezuela for many years with staff on the ground. Thankfully, the first thing we did was make sure that they were all safe and accounted for, and that is the case. We work also with 7 trusted local Venezuelan organizations, and we've been delivering humanitarian services to tens of thousands of Venezuelans over the last few years in health, nutrition, food security, protection and education. We're now mobilizing that team and our partner organizations to respond to what is obviously a very devastating set of earthquakes. It's going to have long-lasting humanitarian impact. So right now, there is an intense search and rescue operation going on, but we are also mobilizing to provide basic relief items, critical medical supplies, and deliver those supplies to frontline workers in the most affected areas. Your correspondent referenced the logistical challenges of getting supplies in right now. The airport is damaged. Fortunately, we have pre-positioned stock inside the country that we're able to resource and more stock across the border in Colombia. So we're working with what we have and working with partner organizations that already have presence in impacted areas and existing services that can now be oriented towards the relief efforts.
You mentioned the logistical challenges we're seeing countries from around the world, not just the U.S., helping out the United Nations, organizations like World Central Kitchen, which always shows up during times like this, stepping in to help. How do all those efforts come together? How do you work around some of those logistical challenges you mentioned?
Yeah, it's tremendous to see the international support that's been offered and is being mobilized for Venezuela, because this is a country that before the earthquakes hit was facing pretty significant humanitarian need. 8 million Venezuelans in need of humanitarian assistance, and people across the country were struggling to meet their basic needs even before this disaster struck. So it really does need a significant mobilization internationally, but also really working with national and local organizations inside the country that have deep knowledge of the context and communities and can mobilize support quickly. The response is going to need to be multifaceted, and right now the focus is on essential relief items: shelter, water, food, medical services, but quickly we will need to be thinking about, and we already are thinking about, how do we resource and support public services in impacted areas that were overstretched and under-resourced before this hit, and think about mental health and psychosocial support services and protection services for the very significant number of people who've been impacted directly and indirectly by this.
Challenges you mentioned, the humanitarian crisis already in place. Just how much harder does that make this response?
It's a game changer. I think when you're looking at a community that has already been struggling, that then has a natural disaster. Unfortunately, this happens around the world. We have so many countries that are dealing with political, economic conflict.
Get the thing off of me now!
And then a natural disaster strikes, and they don't have the reserves and the resources on hand to respond to other communities and other countries might be able to. So it is significant. On top of that, and this is always the case with an earthquake, the logistical challenges in physically accessing the area are going to be significant. So the airports obviously are one thing. Internet connectivity is down. There are other challenges to just getting supplies in and being able to respond. So that there is a lot going on here that means we are really needing to set up a robust response for these people that were so vulnerable even before this.
All right, so we appreciate everything you're doing, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us this morning.
Thank you.
All right, let's now cross over to the Venezuelan capital of Caracas. Journalist Ana Vanessa Guerrero is there for us again this morning. Ana, thanks for joining us. Just walk us through the situation on the ground where you are right now.
You with the butt thing?
The last 24 hours.
Would you help me for the love of God?
The station comes in focus.
With the butt thing.
Yes,
Girls,
so
you butt thing.
the ongoing effort throughout the night to try to
Ow.
rescue survivors who might
And it hurt? I bet, yes.
under the falling building. I am now in one of the affected areas in the capital city of Caracas.
That's not good.
Where
No, it's not.
here they have.
You gotta be kidding me.
They say and they tell me that they will not move until they get news from their loved ones. So, you know, as we were talking now, there are challenges. But also the people, they are tired, they are scared.
Went back upstairs for some clothing.
Or that sometimes are more than welcome now, that is what they have been telling here, in Caracas.
Absolutely not.
From talking to different responders, firefighters, and paramedics, also, trying to rescue people in the area of
What are their biggest worries right now? What is it they're asking for in that need?
They're asking for the basics because they are working with basically nothing. So, yesterday they were telling, people, even family members.
No.
To bring flashlights, to continue the rescue, operations through the night. And they're asking for gloves, for masks, helmets, whatever they can. And anyone that can come and help, that is something that they are looking for. Food, even coffee, just to try to survive this hour, to try to help in any way they can, of course. They're also worried that things might be taking a little bit too long to recover and to try to rescue the people that are here. But again, it's a titanic effort, but this week and the volunteers are doing in Caracas and also in Hawaii.
And how has the Venezuelan government, led by the interim president Delcy Rodriguez, been handling the situation so far, especially given all the challenges the country was already facing before this disaster?
Ready to learn more about Entivio today? Talk to your healthcare provider and visit Entivio.com. With Entivio, you may be able to pay as little as $0 per dose. Plus, our team can help connect you with additional support programs. Entivio.
Sometimes the messiest part of life is the schedule. When there's zero time, Ryobi brings home all that's needed, from breakfast on the floor to pet hair, stains, and more. Anytime, anywhere, Ryobi Cordless Cleaning has the answer. So don't stress the mess. Ryobi. Only at the Home Depot.
The best way to see the USA starts in a Chevy SUV. With room for the whole family. Added peace of mind for every mile. And range to take you farther.
Get out there and see the USA. Right now, get 3.9% financing for 60 months on all 2026 Chevy Equinox models.
There's no better way to see the USA.
Yes, well, it's very different the way they are understanding the situation now as they did in the past. For example, now they're welcoming the international aid. For many years, we didn't see that coming from the government. They immediately rejected any aid and they said they could handle. Now they acknowledge they cannot handle this tragedy. And they're not only welcoming the aid, but they're also asking the private sector to help out, to bring machinery or whatever they need to keep the search going. And now we see missions from their own United States, but other countries, including, for example, El Salvador, which last year would have been unimaginable.
Do we know, I know it's early, just how much of that aid is getting in these early hours?
We have no confirmation of that just yet, but we do know the missions are here. We do know they're not only bringing machinery and tools, they're also bringing experts, they're bringing teams to help the teams already on the ground. And that is going to significantly change the situation, or at least that is what first responders here believe. Because again, they don't only need the basics, but they also need the people, the experts, someone who can lead them into understanding a tragedy of this magnitude.
And Vanessa Guerrero, we appreciate all of your reporting on the ground. We're thinking of you and everyone there right now. Thank you so much. Back here at home, President Trump scored two big legal victories from the Supreme Court yesterday. Both center on immigration. The first ruling allows the White House to remove legal protections from hundreds of thousands of immigrants from Haiti and Syria. That paves the way for the administration to deport people from those countries who were given what's known as temporary protected status. In another decision handed down yesterday, the divided court ruled that someone looking to enter the U.S. at the southern border cannot claim asylum while still standing on Mexican soil. Why? Because they're not technically in the United States. They must have already crossed the border to claim asylum. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Nixon Maris and NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, who's in Washington. Good morning to both of you. Julia, let's start with you. This ruling that removes these legal protections, how big of a victory is this for the Trump administration? And then what kind of action could we see as a result of this decision?
It's a huge victory, Joe. It's yet another time where this Supreme Court has taken power away from federal courts and given more power to the executive branch. Because what this ultimately came down to is whether or not federal judges could tell the Trump administration, no, you're not in a position to remove these protected statuses because the conditions in the countries that you're talking about have not improved. It's still not safe to send anyone back to those countries. So right now it applies to people coming from Haiti and Syria. That's 350,000. But there have been other times where the Trump administration has tried to remove protections and been stopped, like in many of the African countries, like South Sudan, for example. There was an attempt for El Salvador. Right now that is continuing through the fall. But there are a number that could definitely end very soon. And now that they have this new authority given them by this opinion, they can go back and try to tell those judges that those opinions that they had to block in the first place were no longer valid, given what the Supreme Court said.
Misty, let's bring you in here. This is something we've seen before. A 6-3 vote along ideological lines. In the dissenting opinion, the liberal Justice Elena Kagan argued race was a factor for President Trump. Walk us through the main legal arguments for you.
So in the dissent, there were three main legal arguments. The first is a narrower view of the statute at issue. And Justice Kagan in her dissent, joined by two other justices, said that the court can review at least the procedural steps that need to be taken when removing temporary protected status. So that's one argument. The other argument is that there is heavy race-based bias when removing temporary protected status, specifically with regard to Haiti. And she pointed to, in the decision, saying that there were statements made by the executive, meaning President Trump, so repellent and racially inflected that the majority declines to put them in print, speaking about the opinion that was written. And so when making that determination with regard to Haiti, that race played a factor, and the dissent said that was improper. And last is what we call a public policy argument, that there are real world consequences to this determination, putting people in significant risk being sent back to their countries and putting them in danger while there's a litigation playing out, and even saying that these individuals could be put on the next plane. So those are the three core arguments raised by the dissent.
Julia, let's turn to the second case where people can claim asylum, whether they are physically in the U.S. versus just right across the border. This might seem like a small change, but explain the history behind this and the impact this decision is going to have.
Well, it might not make an immediate impact on what's happening at the border, because already it's very hard for anyone to be able to cross the border and claim asylum, even if they are on U.S. ground, because of these policies that the Trump administration put in on day one, even if they're claiming asylum legally at the border or between the ports of entry, they've really made a huge asylum crackdown across the border. But this goes back to another policy that started almost a decade ago, that said when Trump first came into office, it said that if you were standing on the Mexican side of the border, but you could see U.S. authorities, because there's really a buffer zone in many cases, or you might be walking up to a port of entry, if you're in line, is that the time that you can make an asylum claim? And right now, the Supreme Court is siding with that previous policy that was put in place by the first Trump administration to say, no, if you're on the Mexican side of the border, you cannot make an asylum claim. So while that may seem small and an immediately applicable process, this does have very big implications, because the Trump administration over and over again has tried to curb the rights of people to claim asylum at the border, and even people who are already in the United States who are trying to claim asylum, like those people with temporary protected status now. And so this could mean, when they do get a decision that they'll have to make later on about the current asylum policies, they could again side with the Trump administration and decide that this is really up to the executive branch on how it wants to determine who gets asylum at the border.
Misty, for this case, a lot of the focus is on the word arrive. And let's be clear, there's some very clear tensions here between the justices, specifically Alito and Sotomayor. Help us understand how each side saw this word, how it's used differently.
Yeah, so it's funny because when you're talking about the Supreme Court, there's so many legal technicalities that we always get into here. This particular decision hinges on the plain meaning of the word arrive. So the majority opinion says that arrive means what it means when you look in the dictionary, that you don't arrive somewhere until you're actually physically on U.S. soil. You don't arrive to the United States until you've actually crossed into it. So you cannot seek asylum, but basically in this process called metering that Julia just explained, people can be turned away at the border, they have not technically arrived on U.S. soil, and therefore cannot seek asylum until they do so. Now, on the flip side, Justice Sotomayor and the dissent said, arriving is when you get to the place where you are seeking help. So it does not actually require stepping over that border. And those are the tensions of the two sides. Ultimately, the majority determining the word arrive means what it means in the dictionary. You don't arrive until you get there. Justice Alito saying, you don't get a touchdown until you're in the end zone, to use that analogy. So it really was a decision that hinged on that plain language of the word arrive.
Julia, very, very quickly here, we have a week left, expecting decisions, still some major decisions expected, including birthright citizenship, right?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, we saw a glimpse last year into how the justices were viewing birthright citizenships, saying that they couldn't knock down President Trump's executive order trying to end birthright citizenship nationally when only one district or one circuit is weighing in on that. So already seen a glimpse into their thinking, at least on the logistics in ending birthright citizenship. And now the Supreme Court will have to weigh in on whether or not it's a violation of the 14th Amendment for the president to say that only children born to U.S. citizens or people with legal permanent status here are considered U.S. citizens, because throughout much of this country's history, it has been that if you were born on U.S. soil, you are a U.S. citizen for life. This also comes as the Trump administration is ramping up efforts to denaturalize people, meaning if you became a U.S. citizen while you were here and they decide you've done that fraudulently or you've committed a crime that is egregious since then, they may have a way of denaturalizing you. So a lot of emphasis on citizenship, and it will be really interesting to see how this court weighs in on that and what they say about it.
We'll come next week, Julia and Misty. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Let's take a look now at your weekend forecast. Time for your morning news now weather. And Angela Baskin joins us with the forecast. Good morning.
Hi, Joe. Good morning. Happy Friday. We made it. Weekend looks a little funky in some spots. Let's talk about where we're dealing with issues right now. That's across the middle of the country. Notice we've got some of that line of thunderstorms kind of working across parts of western Kentucky and Tennessee, but we've also got a whole lot of folks under flood watches. This has been kind of a rinse and repeat situation that we've seen each morning and kind of in the afternoon hours as we've kind of just got all of this moisture sliding east. 17 million people in total. Notice it goes from parts of West Virginia all the way across to Kansas and into Oklahoma, St. Louis, Springfield. You're included in that, as well as Cincinnati. So heads up in those locations. You're likely going to see some flooding as the day goes on. And here's why. We've got this area that's kind of, again, moving to the east. It does ramp up those severe storms anywhere from Kentucky stretching back to Missouri. As the day gets going, really we start to see some of that daytime heating. And then, as I mentioned, the flooding is going to be something we watch specifically across the Tennessee River Valley through the day today. Tomorrow, heading into your Saturday, your weekend plans across the Mid-Atlantic could be interrupted by some of these storms that are going to work across that region through the day. And you guessed it, more flooding concerns across, again, that region here as we get to your Saturday plans. Today, though, we're focused from Joplin to Charleston, Indianapolis, Paducah, St. Louis, all included in that slight risk of flash flooding as we gear up for multiple inches of rain by the time we get through tomorrow. So 3 to 5 inches, we've got some saturated grounds in this area, so Louisville, St. Louis, Springfield, you could all pick up some additional inches of rain here as the next couple of days goes on. So reminding folks not to drive through those flooded roadways. That's a concern that we have through the next 2 days at least. The severe risk, not quite as large as it was yesterday, but still, again, Springfield to Evansville, that's where you can see some of those stronger storms ramping up, wind gusts, hail, Joe. Parts of the plains and the northern Rockies will also see that chance as we get through today and into tonight.
Angie, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.
For us, every day is refreshing. Whether it's delivering an order to a friendly customer or setting up a new dispenser, we make staying hydrated effortless. With high-quality, great-tasting water delivered straight to your door, we're here to help keep your home stocked without the hassle. And with flexible delivery plans, you get the water you need whenever you need it. Because hydration should be easy, convenient, and always refreshing.
When I started Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses, I didn't know how to turn all this fancy prettiness into a classy looking logo. But GoDaddy Aero does with its magical AI powers. It not only creates it, it slaps that sweet thing everywhere.
Significant day for the central bank as it transitions to new leadership.
Correspondent James Jacoby traces the battle between Donald Trump and the central bank.
If I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
You think that this is all part of an effort by the president and this administration to get his hands on this powerful economic lever?
I think he's been very clear about that.
In a lot of ways, this is a consequential power struggle. I mean, these are two of the most influential policymakers in the world.
Economically, this is the most important bite of the second Trump administration.
Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats.
That's when you knew the fight was on. I mean, the real fight was on.
This agency feels it is not under any obligation to be accountable.
It's not just a struggle between President Trump and Chair Powell. It's a struggle over the future design of the federal government.
Now I'm gonna find the president versus the Fed.
President Donald Trump had odds for months with Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, who revealed on Sunday he's under criminal investigation by Trump's Justice Department.
It's Sunday night, and all of a sudden, there's a video posted on the Fed's website with a message from Powell.
Good evening. On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June.
That video I remember exactly when I was on Zoom. I remember wanting to see the second time, which I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing.
I don't think that there was anything more explosive that the administration could do beyond, threatening criminal proceedings against the sitting Fed chair.
I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure.
I mean, in the 113 years in history of the Fed, nothing like this has ever happened before. And it's implying that the chairman has broken the law. It's not simply a question of making a bad policy choice or whatnot, or things not going exactly according to plan. It's an implication that he did something criminally wrong.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
It just was clear that this was a pretext. We don't like your monetary policy decisions, so we're going to change the people making the decisions.
I would say the Fed really owes it to the American people to get interest rates down. That's the only thing he's good for.
It was the ultimate escalation in a long-running clash between Donald Trump and the chair of the Federal Reserve.
He's terrible, the Federal Reserve Chairman.
He's a fool. He's a stupid man. I'll be honest. I'd love to fire his ass. He should be fired. Guy's grossly incompetent.
An unprecedented attempt to assert control over the most powerful institution in the U.S. economy. Perhaps more than the President of the United States, the Federal Reserve has a shocking amount of power over the U.S. economy and therefore the global economy. They control the switch of what interest rates are ultimately going to be in America. As Jerome Powell's tenure as head of the Federal Reserve has been coming to a tumultuous end, we've been talking to former and current Fed officials, economists.
When you undermine faith in our central bank, the pain comes much faster.
Titans of finance.
This Fed became harder and harder to defend.
Legal experts. Were you worried about a general power grab here?
We were seeing a power grab.
As well as some of the president's staunchest defenders.
If Trump behaves like a king, Chair Powell behaves like an emperor.
To trace the roots of the battle and understand the stakes.
When you look at Trump's economic agenda, this fight is actually the most consequential of his presidency. I think he knows that his economic and political success is dependent on what the Fed does. And so this attack for him is almost existential.
All right, any moment now, the president is going to announce his pick to lead the Federal Reserve. It's a position that is considered to spice up to be the second most important job in the country.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Governor Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve Board.
President Trump and Jerome Powell weren't always at odds. Trump appointed Powell to lead the Federal Reserve in late 2017.
it is my pleasure and my honor to announce my nomination of Jerome Powell to be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. Congratulations.
They had a good relationship to start out with. When Powell is being announced as the Fed chair pick, Trump has only good things to say about him.
He's strong, he's committed, he's smart. Jay will put his considerable talents and experience to work leading our nation's independent central bank.
Jerome Powell, to some degree, was right out of central casting when it comes to a Wall Street meets Washington bureaucrat, if you will. He had worked in private equity for a period of time with the Carlyle Group. He had worked at the Treasury Department under Bush, and he'd been a Fed governor for many years before this. And I think was a card-carrying Republican at the time.
I'm committed to making decisions with objectivity, based on the best available evidence, in the long-standing tradition of monetary policy independence.
The Federal Reserve is going to keep ratcheting up short interest rates, and that is pushing down long rates. The market is telling you they don't have any fear of inflation.
Powell would take the helm of an institution responsible for keeping inflation in check and unemployment low, using its power to raise and lower short-term interest rates.
The Fed's open market committee that sets interest rates is the most powerful economic body in the United States, full stop. I mean, it is the bedrock of the entire financial system and the entire economy. Think of the U.S. economy as like a nuclear reactor, okay? It's humming along, it's producing energy. The Federal Reserve are like the engineers in the control room, controlling that reactor. They're determining how hot it gets or how cool it gets.
The Fed is likely to announce interest rate hikes today.
So when they make these decisions on interest rates, they are literally managing the temperature of the economy.
At the time Powell took over, the economy had been heating up after a long slump, creating a risk of inflation if interest rates stayed too low. The Fed had already been raising interest rates, and at his first meeting as chair, Powell moved to raise them even more.
We decided today to raise the target rate for the federal funds rate by 1/4 percentage point, bringing it to 1.5 to 1.75%.
The rate hikes would soon upset Wall Street.
Well, the US market started the day lower and the losses only got worse. The third worst increase drop in history.
Markets love low interest rates. And if you offer the markets two possibility higher rates or lower rates, they will go for lower rates.
Analysts say investors are worried about rising interest rates.
Markets are like little kids. They want candy, and the minute you try to take the candy away, they have a tantrum.
The Dow Jones plunged more than 800 points Wednesday. Its worst.
In the White House, falling stock market every night on CNBC looks like bad news.
The decline will accelerate if Jay Powell's mortgage back.
And Trump interpreted it as really bad news. And that's when the antagonism started.
I think the Fed has gone crazy. I really disagree with what the Fed is doing. I think the Fed is out of control. I think what they're doing is wrong.
Our biggest threat is the Fed, because the Fed is raising rates too fast.
What were these attacks like from your vantage point inside the Fed?
So within the Fed, I think we were initially shocked.
Lael Brainerd was on the Fed's Board of Governors at the time.
Rates were extremely low, and the Fed slowly started raising them to more normal levels. We, inside the Federal Reserve, completely understood why the president might be frustrated and might even articulate that, but I think it was surprising just how vocal he was about it.
Even though markets recovered, Trump was still upset.
We're going to be breaking records. If we had a Fed that would lower interest rates, we'd be like a rocket ship. But we don't have a Fed that knows what they're doing, so it's one of those little things.
He started pointing the blame directly at Powell, complaining that the Fed's rate hikes were undermining his efforts to grow the economy with deregulation and massive tax cuts.
I would go and see him. He would say things like, "I made a big mistake with Jerome Powell," and I would say, "Yes, sir. I think you probably did."
Stephen Moore was an economic advisor to the president.
We were really ready for a boom. We passed the tax cut. Everything was looking good. And then there was a big market sell-off, a big sell-off, and Trump was very frustrated with Jerome Powell at that point.
Because the markets sell off, because the markets reacted to these.
And he thought he was slowing the economic growth that the economy was capable of. Trump is an old real estate guy, so real estate people like low interest rates. And so Trump was always harping on the fact that he believed that the Fed was restraining economic growth by holding interest rates too high.
And you share that view.
At that time, yes, I think he was right.
How do you respond to those that would say that the Fed was undermining the president's agenda?
I think there is no evidence for that. President Trump likes to point to that period as a period of great growth, extremely low unemployment, and inflation that was low and stable. So it was a really good period. He likes to tout how great that period was. It's hard to see why there would be a view that the Fed was somehow undermining that when that was the result.
The Federal Reserve cutting rates for the first time since 2008.
In 2019, as Trump was waging a trade war against China, the Fed would start to lower rates to cushion the economy.
We decided today to lower the target for the federal funds rate by 0.25 percentage point.
But Trump still complained they weren't moving fast enough.
And that's when you saw Trump for the first time really start to attack Jay Powell directly.
It was very, very unusual. I cannot tell you how unusual this was, to have such a public attack on the Fed chair.
Fed rate too high, they are their own worst enemies, they don't have a clue. The Fed.
He's pressuring Powell constantly on Twitter to cut rates. He calls Jay Powell and the Fed governors a group of boneheads. He questions whether Jay Powell is a bigger enemy of the United States than Chairman Xi in China.
I have to imagine that lands pretty heavily inside the Fed when the president is posing such a question.
That's just a shocking statement. I think we can just leave it at that. The role of central banks is to do unpopular things that elected politicians really can't do. When the economy is going great and businesses are hiring and interest rates are low, that feels good to everybody. But everybody also hates high prices and they hate inflation. And it's really the role of the Federal Reserve to start to slow the economy down when inflation is getting too high. But if you're an elected politician, you want that party to keep going on until you get reelected.
To help keep the American economy healthy is a primary function of the Federal Reserve System.
That's why Congress designed the Fed to be insulated from political interference, so it would be free to act in the long-term interest of the economy.
Fed independence is crucial to economic well-being. Why? Because political interference will mean that the Fed will be reacting to the short-term political calendar and not the longer-term economic issues.
The Federal Reserve Board plays a very great role in determining whether that inflation will be checked and how it will be checked.
Until Trump, no president had tried to pressure a Fed chair as hard as Richard Nixon in the 1970s.
You see, Dr. Burns, that's a standing vote of appreciation in advance for lower interest rates and more money.
The president was worried about re-election and brought significant pressure to bear on Federal Reserve Chair Arthur Burns to have lower rates in the period before the election to really just juice the economy, recognizing that people are more likely to vote for the sitting president when the economy feels like it's doing well.
The time has come for decisive action. Action that will break the vicious circle of spiraling prices and costs.
And he told Arthur Burns, he said, I want low interest rates. Do whatever it takes.
Hello, Dr. Burns. Yeah, how are you? Arthur, how are you? I'm having a meeting of my open market committee on Tuesday. Take them around a little. Okay.
So Burns did. Burns relented.
Good evening. The economic news tonight contains few bright spots.
What we saw is greater rates of inflation.
The prices have gone completely way up.
And once inflation got underway, it really ramped up in a way that was very harmful
Inflation has cost us dearly in the last year.
High inflation.
Inflation is such a very great advantage for our economy.
Food, a 42% jump. Gas, up 100%.
I think this inflation really covering up a recession or depression.
Not only did we end up with higher inflation, but there was also a high rate of unemployment.
7 in the morning, and already outside the Miami food stamp office, a long line of people.
And so it's a period of very significant economic pain, far beyond anything that we have seen in recent years.
But unlike Fed Chair Burns, Jerome Powell stood firm.
You still want to depose Jay Powell? Well, let's see what he does.
By 2019, there had been reports that Trump was considering firing him, something no president had done before.
Going into this administration, no president had attempted to explore that bounds.
Lev Menand used to work at the New York Fed and is an expert in the laws that give the Fed its independence.
What legally can the president do? What would it take for a president to be able to fire a Fed chair?
So the Federal Reserve Board is what we call an independent agency. The chair of the Federal Reserve can only be removed by the president prior to the completion of his or her term for cause. That's the language in the statute, for cause. Whereas the Secretary of the Treasury can be removed by the president at any time at the president's pleasure.
And cause can't be a policy disagreement.
Cause can't be a policy disagreement, that's right. The whole purpose of this language is to prevent presidents from removing officers for policy reasons, and in fact to create policy independence. That is the goal. The goal is to enable the head of the Federal Reserve to pursue a policy path at odds with the White House. That's why Congress built it this way.
Look what happened. Is this crazy?
By the time Trump was reelected in 2024, one of the pressing questions was what he would do about Powell, who'd been reappointed by President Biden and still had a year and a half left in his term. Trump was asked about it on Meet the Press.
The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, said he will not leave his post even if you ask him to. Will you try to replace Jerome Powell?
No, I don't think so. I don't see it, but I think if I told him to, he would. But if I asked him to, he probably wouldn't. But if I told him to, he would.
You don't have plans to do that right now?
No, I don't.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
Trump began his second term with a big agenda.
He's proposing the most extreme tariffs this country has seen in decades. An enormous immigration crackdown and an enormous tax cut.
And from the start, he made it clear what he wanted from the Fed.
The World Economic Forum kicking off at Davos this week.
Hello to everyone in beautiful Davos.
3 days into his term, he gave a video address at the influential World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.
Davos was this moment where I think you really realized how Trump was going to play it in his second term with the Fed.
I'll demand that interest rates drop immediately, and likewise, they should be dropping all over the world. Interest rates should follow us.
He's not, suggesting this is the right thing to do for the economy. He's demanding it.
What do you make of that?
Wow.
He wants to influence interest rates at home and in other countries. I wonder how that's going to go over.
We've been used to politicians weighing in on monetary policy forever. I think that that's been true for as long as the central bank has been around.
Neel Kashkari is the only current Fed official who agreed to speak to us.
3 days into Trump's presidency, he was speaking to the Davos crowd and basically saying that he was going to demand that the Fed immediately lower rates. How does that land inside the Fed?
It doesn't really. We hear it, of course, we pay attention to the news, but the louder the noise gets, the more we hug our mast, which is, these are the goals that Congress has assigned us. Focus on doing our jobs. That's the best way through a noisy environment.
Good afternoon. 6 days after the speech at Davos, Powell made it clear the Fed was not going to heed the president's demands.
I think where the committee is very much in the mode of waiting to see what policies are enacted.
That instantly, I think, also showed where the Fed was going to be in this kind of battle with Trump. They were not going to be cowed to the president's demands to lower interest rates, and they were going to set policy based on their best assessment of the economy.
Mr. Chairman, at a event in Davos, from $2 anyway, the president said he'll demand that interest rates drop immediately.
I'm not gonna have any response or comment whatsoever on what the president said. It's not appropriate for me to do so.
Can you just comment on whether he's physically communicating this demand to you?
I've had no contact.
Thank you. The pressure wasn't just coming from the president. Inflation was still high and had been for 4 years running. And the Fed was still singed by how it had responded to rampant inflation years earlier, stemming from the pandemic and government spending under President Biden.
The soaring inflation and the effects of the pandemic continue to impact every American.
Back then, Powell and his colleagues had believed the inflation was temporary and kept rates low. But by late 2021, it had reached the highest level in decades.
It's at that juncture that the Federal Reserve took about 6 months to really turn its policy to a policy of hiking and tightening, and that was probably far too long to make that transition.
I mean, given the fact that keeping inflation under control is part of the Fed's mandate, a major part of the Fed's mandate, is it fair to say that was a massive mistake?
It was a big mistake. That period of time was valuable in terms of fighting inflation, and with the benefit of hindsight, it was a mistake.
That policy error was massively consequential. It has been particularly consequential for low-income people because inflation hits the poor particularly hard. It has become a political problem because of affordability.
Now, Trump's sweeping second-term agenda was putting the Fed in another bind.
Tax cuts, a major decrease in immigration, which raises and puts upward pressure on labor prices. Tariffs, which raises the cost of imports. Virtually all of these things create inflationary pressure.
This Wednesday, April 2nd, President Donald Trump has declared Liberation Day.
In early April 2025, the pressure got even more intense.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time.
We all knew that Trump was going to put in tariffs when he returned to the White House. He talked about that throughout the campaign trail. But I don't think anyone really expected these absolutely massive tariffs on basically all of the country's trading partners.
Trump declared a national emergency over the U.S. trade deficit and imposed steep tariffs on foreign imports.
There's this very memorable moment in which he's sitting there holding up this big poster with all the various tariff rates against all the different countries.
You think of European Union, very friendly, they rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half.
And people in the newsroom and I think across trading floors, across Wall Street, are trying to see what the numbers are.
Vietnam, great negotiators, great people. They like me, I like them. The problem is they charge us 90%. We're going to charge them 46% tariff.
It was the breadth of the tariffs. It was the fact that they applied to the entire planet, and they seem to be extremely arbitrary.
If you look at Switzerland, 61% to 31%.
Nobody anticipated the tariffs that were announced on April 2nd. And so, the market reacted very harshly.
Well, if yesterday was Liberation Day, today was Liquidation Day.
The S&P 500 fell more than 10% in 3 days. The decline was one of the worst stretches we've seen since World War II.
The Great Financial Crisis, the COVID pandemic, and Black Monday, these are some of the worst days in market history.
Then they started being suspended.
The president here announcing a 90-day pause on tariffs.
Delayed.
Every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you.
Increased.
The tariff on China will now go up to 125%.
Reduced. Increased again. And Business has a hard time coping with that.
Falling off a cliff, basically, we are down about panic in the bond market. There was
Strategy with no details, all these advisors seem to be talking past each other.
Look at his face. Richard, head buried in his hand, literally.
When these tariffs were announced, how does that look from the view of the Federal Reserve?
Well, we know that tariffs raise prices because we're buying goods from abroad, and if those prices are going to go up, some of that is going to be borne by American consumers. We know that. The question is, how high is that inflation going to get? And then how much does that slow down economic growth?
Jerome Powell responded publicly.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth.
Warning that tariffs risked reigniting inflation and challenging the president's claim that they would not be paid by American consumers.
We understand that elevated levels of unemployment or inflation can be damaging and painful for communities, families, and businesses.
To the president's allies, like economist Judy Shelton, those were fighting words.
Even by talking about tariffs as a signature initiative under President Trump, I thought, here's Powell, who always says, I don't want to get out of my lane, I'll never comment on fiscal policy, that would be inappropriate. Now he's mentioning tariffs and tariff-induced inflation all the time.
Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation.
He was setting himself up in direct confrontation with a signature policy of the elected administration.
Shelton and other conservatives have been critical of the expanding influence of the Fed over the economy and financial markets.
I don't see the Fed as the little guy here in a battle with the president. I see the Fed as inordinately powerful and dangerously so. The Fed has gotten too big for its britches.
With the Fed unwilling to heed his demands, Trump lashed out and threatened to fire Powell.
I'm not happy with him. I let him know it, and if I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
We are now learning President Donald Trump has just removed the director of the Office of Government Ethics.
The president's threats to fire Powell came as he was firing officials at other federal agencies.
The administration has now fired commissioners from the National Labor Relations Board and the EEOC.
But if he wanted to get rid of Powell, Trump was going to need to demonstrate cause, not just his policy frustrations.
Jay Powell back on Capitol Hill today in front of the Senate Finance Committee.
That alleged cause would emerge at a routine hearing before Congress in June.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Chair Powell, for joining us today.
Twice a year, Chair Powell goes in front of lawmakers on the Hill to talk about the Fed and answer questions about the economy. But at the June hearing, things took a bit of a turn.
During this time of hardship, the Fed has spent billions on lavish renovations to its DC offices.
Senator Tim Scott, one of President Trump's close allies, led the attack.
Tim Scott starts asking these questions about the renovation of Fed headquarters.
We're talking about rooftop terraces, custom elevators that open into VIP dining rooms, white marble finishes, and even a private art collection.
The Federal Reserve headquarters was built in the 30s. It's almost 100 years old. The Fed had long been pushing this project to overhaul the building.
It was this massive, sprawling project that was running $700 million over budget. It becomes clear that one of the main lines of questioning for these lawmakers is going to be about these renovations.
Would you take a few minutes, please, and explain what's going on with the value of that building and why the costs seem to be so exorbitant?
I came to understand how badly the Eccles building really needed a serious renovation. It never had one. It was not really safe.
I think he bristled at the idea that the Fed was embarking on this absolutely extravagant undertaking.
There are no special elevators. It's just they're old elevators that have been there. There are no new water features. There's no beehives, and there's no roof terrace gardens.
Later in the hearing, Senator Scott cranked up the pressure.
Page 129 of the final plans reflected rooftop garden terraces. The page 127 and 129 are where we found the ornate water features and final plans, the new elevators that drop board members offered the VIP dining suite was page 37 of the final plans.
Some of those are just flatly misleading. The idea of elevators, it's the same elevator it's been there since the building was built. So that's a mischaracterization, and some of those are no longer in the plans.
It was not in itself inappropriate for Congress to ask the Fed how much it was spending on renovations. That being said, this was coming at a time when there were a lot of reasons to worry about the Federal Reserve's independence.
I could be wrong without any question, but I don't want to be misled. That's different.
Other allies of the president made the case on Fox Business.
I think there needs to be an investigation. I think that maybe he lied to Congress. I think things are going to get a lot worse for Jerome Powell, and it'd just be better off if he resigned.
So at this time, we see another Trump administration official get into the fight, and that's Bill Pulte, who's the head of a rather obscure financial agency in DC called the Federal Housing Finance Agency.
We're just scratching the surface as to what Chairman Powell's been up to, and it's very concerning.
Bill Pulte is acting like the attack dog here. This guy kind of just comes in off the sidelines and starts heckling on a topic that really has no interaction with his agency.
And that was the moment where it became quite clear that they were trying to build some kind of case against Powell.
Is there any evidence that Powell tried to mislead or did mislead Congress?
No, there's no evidence that Powell tried to mislead Congress, and lawmakers on the committee that he spoke to at that hearing have said as much.
To Neil Kashkari at the Fed, it was clear what it was all about.
I wasn't surprised because there had been so much chatter from different administration officials about trying to find some way to say that he has given them cause for the president to remove him.
Do you really think that the line of questioning was sort of a pretext in order to get him out?
Oh, of course. I mean, at this point, having now seen the pattern over and over again, they don't like our monetary policy. And so how do you change us from focusing on our dual mandate goals and focusing on data and analysis? You change the people who are doing the work.
Today, the president decided to take a tour of the Federal Reserve headquarters, and it comes as there's mounting criticism and scrutiny of Chair Powell.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and it feels very good, actually, to be back on the construction site.
A month after Powell's testimony, President Trump made a surprise visit to Fed headquarters.
I watched it live. I have it on in my office when it happened live.
I just want to see one thing happen, very simple. Interest rates have to come down.
And this was like, I don't even know how to describe it, it was so crazy. This was just such a kind of shocking turn of events. Presidents don't visit the Fed. That is like not a common thing whatsoever. And so the circumstances were already quite bizarre.
And we're with the chairman, as you know. And we're just taking a look at what's happening here.
This was the first time that we had seen these two kind of in the same camera frame since Trump appointed him as chair all those years ago. And Trump has said a lot of insulting things about Powell. He's been calling him a ton of personal insults. And here they were kind of going toe to toe about the costs of a building.
Do you expect any more additional cost overruns?
Don't expect them. We're ready for it, but
it was great theater, I must say. And I remember watching Chair Powell's face.
It looks like it's about 3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot.
And you had several instances where the president would say something and Chair Powell would go like this.
And,
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody from Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
I noticed that at about 3.1 as well. 3.1, 3.2.
This came from us.
Yes.
I mean, it was things that for me were unthinkable. Even when President Nixon attacked the Fed chair, it was done behind closed doors. But this was a conflict right there. And it was very clear what the president was doing. He was embarrassing Chair Powell.
I don't know who does it.
Now, you were including the Martin renovation. You just added in that third building. That's a third building.
It's the building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
So it's part of the overall. So
Trump, whether, implicitly or explicitly was inflating how bad of a problem it was. I don't think that we have seen Trump being fact-checked by another member of the broader government. And I think that is what made this interaction just so extraordinary.
As a real estate developer, what would you do with a project manager who would be over budget?
Generally speaking, what would I do? I'd fire them.
Are there things the chairman can say to you today that would make you back off some of the earlier criticisms?
Well, I'd love him to lower interest rates. Other than that, what can I tell you?
The president would soon step up the pressure campaign, going after one of the 7 officials who sit on the Fed's Board of Governors and vote on interest rates.
Increasing pressure on the US Federal Reserve ahead of its annual economic symposium.
Everyone was heading out to Jackson Hole, Wyoming for the Fed's annual conference. And as everyone is heading out there, that's when we see the tweets. So right as officials are gathering in Jackson Hole, Bill Pulte comes out and says Lisa Cook, one of the governors, has committed mortgage fraud and referred the case to federal prosecutors. And soon after, Trump followed up, also calling for her resignation.
I think it's a big issue. I don't think it's going away. I think she will have to resign, or I think she will be fired.
It sounds like the allegation is that she claimed primary residence on 2 different places at the same time.
That's correct. She cannot do that in America.
It was so surprising to me, it was so out of left field that somebody is now gonna try to dig up something so innocuous and say, well, this is now grounds to fire someone. So it was a shock.
The latest person in the president's crosshairs is Lisa Cook.
I didn't know if she had come to Jackson Hole, because if this is just broken and it's surrounded by Fed reporters. And I give her a lot of credit. She came to Jackson Hole, she fully participated, she focused on her job. I mean, I can't imagine the individual pressure that she felt. Her pictures plastered all around the country, and accusations that she's done something inappropriate are being made.
Lisa, right off the bat, said that they were unfounded. And she said she was willing to provide all the necessary documentation to show that she did not willfully mislead lenders.
President Trump weighed in.
You gonna fire Lisa Cook, he said, the mortgage fire.
She doesn't resign yet. What she did was bad. So I'll fire her if she doesn't resign.
Then he doubled down on his Truth Social site.
Trump posts on social media that he's firing Lisa Cook. This was like an escalation. This was crystallizing the threat and making it real.
Cook firing back, saying the president has no authority to fire her and that she will continue to carry out her duties, saying point blank, I will not resign.
Cook was never charged with a crime and has remained in her post. She submitted evidence to the DOJ to show that any discrepancy on her mortgage application was an inadvertent mistake.
There were prosecutors after this issue came to light who came out and said, if this kind of referral for what was alleged against Lisa Cook had been sent to them as a prosecutor, it would have gone into the trash bin.
Cook hired Abbe Lowell, one of the most high-profile lawyers in DC, to represent her.
If there is discrepancy on someone's mortgage application, an official who has tremendous power and responsibility in this country, isn't that a legitimate inquiry as to what actually happened here?
The short answer to your question is yes, but where is that inquiry? When is it done? What is the opportunity for the person being accused to respond to it? This is a political weaponization for a goal in which there are no boundaries. You make accusations without founding. You don't give somebody an opportunity to respond properly. You make up a reason that you say gives you grounds to do what you did. In that case, it's a smear, but it's more likely to be thought of as a power grab.
Ms. Cook is punching back today, filing a lawsuit against Trump.
Cook and Lowell sued the president, saying the allegations didn't legally constitute cause and her right to due process was violated.
You said that the President of the United States tried to fire Lisa Cook because he wanted to get control of the Federal Reserve Board, he wanted interest rates to be lower. What evidence do you have of that?
We didn't have to look far for his motive. He said it out loud.
You're going to see things happen in the United States that nobody's ever seen before.
In a cabinet meeting after firing Cook, Trump talked about the impact of the changes he was trying to make at the Fed.
We'll have a majority very shortly, so that'll be great. Once we have a majority, housing is going to swing and it's going to People are paying too high an interest rate. That's the only.
You think that this is all part of an effort by the president and this administration to get his hands on this powerful economic lever?
I think he's been very clear about that.
Is there a chilling effect for other officials at the Federal Reserve, a fear that you might be next?
I think that that's in the back of everybody's minds, that why, if it could happen to Lisa, why couldn't it happen to me or any of our colleagues? So that's always there. But it also steals our resolve.
President Trump is kicking off an economic tour as many polls show Americans feel negatively about the economy.
By the fall of 2025, the Fed had begun making small interest rate reductions. But inflation was still too high, prices were rising, and Democrats were hammering the president on affordability. Trump stepped up his attack on Powell.
Too late. You know who too late is? Too late, pal. Jerome too late. He's too late with his interest rate. It's for a reason. He's a bad guy. He's not a smart guy, but he's a bad guy. Too late. Is he going to lower rates a little bit? Finally? Did you see what Jamie Dimon, respected guy, said? You got to get the rates down, you schmuck.
What's the danger of lowering rates?
If we lower rates when the economic fundamentals don't justify it, it's going to push up inflation. And then people are already suffering from, their affordability is hurt by high inflation. And if inflation were to go higher from here, things would become even less affordable.
But behind the scenes, the Trump administration was pursuing another way to deal with the Fed and Powell.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give the fake news a little breaking news. So I believe, and I may be correct, we're checking this. We have a bad head of the Fed. We're going to be making a change. Fortunately, this guy's up.
Good evening. On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. On January 11th, Powell revealed he was under a criminal investigation by the Justice Department. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation.
It's not enough to say this is unprecedented. And to have a kind of an emergency statement put out by the Fed chairman that almost looks like a hostage video was, unsettling is not just the right word. It was really shocking
to see him so stridently and publicly not only defend himself, but to some degree point at the President of the United States. That's when you knew the fight was on. The real fight was on.
Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people. Thank you.
He made the judgment that if you don't stand up to this president and fight back, that drip, 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 the president is going to keep eating away at the legal foundations and the norms that enable government to work properly.
A stunning turn of events as several lawmakers from the president's own party broke with Trump, suggesting his team had gone too far.
They dropped the investigation. I'm not going to get into that. What I'm going to do is drop any consideration for any board confirmation until the Senate.
The backlash was immediate.
I hope that this investigation wraps up very, very quickly. What's the impact of it? Is it wrapped up? It will wrap up quickly. It
included prominent Republicans.
I don't think you trifle with the Federal Reserve.
I don't think Jay Powell's a criminal. 7 Republican members say no crime was committed. How hard is that to understand?
No one from the Trump administration would agree to interviews about the president's attack on Powell and the Fed. But Judy Shelton, who advised Trump in his first term, said his actions have been totally justifiable.
This is about a misuse of funds and an ineptness that should alarm people. This is a very powerful government agency, but the scariest part is that this agency feels it is not under any obligation to be accountable.
What do you say to those who would question whether the president and the Department of Justice are breaking democratic norms by opening investigations into a Fed chair with whom they have a policy disagreement?
Well, they can be fired for cause. So maybe there's a reason if you can find a specific cause, and I think this would qualify, what can they be held accountable for? Not inflation. I mean, he never apologized, let alone resigned.
Inflation has been above your targets for 5 years now, right? If there were a CEO that were missing his or her targets for 5 years running, someone would get fired, right? There'd be some real accountability for that mistake. Where is the demonstration of accountability for having missed your targets for 5 years?
Well, one of the demonstrations of accountability is the fact that the governors of Washington are appointed by the President of the United States, subject to Senate confirmation. They are appointed on staggered terms. This is Congress's design to create a slow-moving accountability, meaning over time the Board of Governors will change. President Trump has already made a number of appointments. Jerome Powell's term as chair of the board comes to a conclusion in mid-May when his 4-year term concludes. That's another moment of accountability when Congress will get to express their view, the Senate, on the president's new appointment.
With Jerome Powell's term as Fed chair winding down, Trump's efforts to control the central bank have been facing setbacks.
Good afternoon.
A federal judge quashed the Justice Department's grand jury subpoenas, saying there was essentially zero evidence to suspect Powell of a crime.
We have a total nincompoop at the Federal Reserve. And
Trump has kept pushing anyway.
I happen to think he's grossly incompetent. It's more than a criminal probe. It's criminal probe, I guess, but it's also probe and incompetence.
The fight with Lisa Cook has made it all the way to the Supreme Court,
Thank you.
where even the most conservative justices seem skeptical of the president's arguments.
And that would weaken, if not shatter, the independence of the Federal Reserve.
Justice Kavanaugh was very clear that if the court were willing to accept the government's view over how little should be required to fire a governor for cause, that would effectively eviscerate the future of Federal Reserve independence.
President Trump posted his new chairman of the Federal Reserve will be Kevin Warsh.
Kevin Warsh. Who is Kevin Warsh?
In the meantime, a shadow has been cast over Trump's hand-picked replacement for Powell, Kevin Warsh, a conservative former Fed governor and vocal critic of the central bank.
The big issue for Warsh is that he is battling credibility issues from day one because of the circumstances under which he left the job, because of everything the Trump administration had been doing up until this point to pressure the Federal Reserve into cutting interest rates. So it just opened up this question of, well, what was promised in order for Warsh to get the nod? What did he say to the president to appease him? Did he make any promises? And those questions have really dogged Warsh throughout his whole confirmation hearing.
Kevin Warsh said for a high-stakes confirmation hearing today.
People out of my
A
house.
Democrat called Warsh President Trump's sock puppet, a notion Republicans tried to dispel.
Please get these men out of my house.
Senator, absolutely not. Have you agreed with the president that you're going to lower interest rates? Senator, I'm glad you framed it that way. The president never asked me to predetermine, commit, fix, decide on any interest rate decision in any of our discussions, nor would I ever agree to do so. So independence takes courage. Let's check out your independence and your courage. We'll start with Mr. Warsh. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? We try to keep politics